They knew from day one. How many times are you going to see the Democratic establishment lie to you before you realize, oh right, the next time they tell you something, it's also a lie?
The Wall Street Journal has now put out an expose regarding the obvious cover-up carried out by those closest to President Joe Biden when it came to his mental decline. Now, there are a lot of details here. I'm gonna try to get to all of the highlights, or at least as many of them as I can, starting with the fact that there were already massive red flags in regard to President Joe Biden's mental decline early on in the beginning months of his administration. But we didn't hear about that, did we? Until it was way too late. Now, a lot of people like us suspected it, but now we have some confirmation that those closest to him saw it and were concerned about it. Administration officials noticed that the president became tired if meetings went long and would make mistakes. They issued a directive to some powerful lawmakers and allies seeking one-on-one time. The exchanges should be short and focused. For example, they avoided doing any of these like meetings first thing in the morning because that was when Biden was struggling the most. And if the president was having what they were referring to as an off day, meetings would just be canceled altogether. In the spring of 2021, again, very early on in his administration, a national security official explained to another aide why a meeting needed to be rescheduled. Quote, "He has good days and bad days, and today was a bad day, so we're going to address this tomorrow," end quote, the former aide recalled the official saying. And so there's more. For instance, congressional Democrats complained that they couldn't even get a hold of Joe Biden to talk to him about policies, his agenda, what the best path forward was strategically in order to accomplish his agenda. So for instance, Representative Adam Smith claimed that he wanted to get in touch with Joe Biden ahead of the Afghanistan withdrawal in 2021 because he was alarmed at the overly optimistic comments he was hearing from Biden about what that withdrawal would look like. So Adam Smith was like, there are some issues at play here, so let's just meet so I can tell you what the concerns are. That way the withdrawal will be a little smoother. He says, "I was begging them to set expectations low," said Smith, who had worked extensively on the issue and harbored concerns about how the withdrawal might go. He sought to talk to Biden directly to share his insights about the region, but couldn't get on the phone with him. In the end, as we know, that withdrawal, even though we were supportive of withdrawing from Afghanistan, the way it was carried out was pretty disastrous. So 13 US service members and more than 170 Afghans died as a result. And Smith made a critical comment to the Washington Post about how the administration was lacking a clear view of the US-backed, Ashraf Ghani government. And this is like when the withdrawal was happening. So he gives that quote to the Washington Post, and get a load of this. Anthony Blinken hits him up on the phone and just starts chiding him for having the audacity to say something even a little critical about Biden. But later, Biden himself called Smith to apologize, and that was allegedly the only time he spoke to Biden throughout his presidency. Okay, and that was like an ongoing issue. That's what you hear over and over again, that people couldn't get any access to the president, Democrats in particular, and that when it came to things like cabinet meetings, they were very rare, and we're gonna get to those details in just a minute.
Sorry, but I gotta do it. Told you.
Right.
So back in 2020 in the primary, I said, look, I've got very serious concerns about Biden having dementia. And I even did this tweet that people hated so much, the people as in Democratic Party, reporters, etc. Hashtag dementia should be trending. And they're like, you're going below the belt. You're trying to help Bernie with this nonsense rumors. I'm like, guys, look, he can't remember words. He's struggling in public to get out thoughts, etc. Right? And we had evidence back then. And of course, every Democrat and every reporter in Washington said, outrageous, scandalous. Look at how dirty these progressives are trying to help Bernie Sanders by implying that there's something wrong with the beloved Joe Biden. Well, the minute he got into office, his staffers are like, there's something wrong with Joe Biden. He's in mental decline. We have to protect him. We have to shield him from these people. We have to spend hours and hours prepping him for simple things because he can't remember anything. They knew from day one. How many times are you going to see the Democratic establishment lie to you before you realize, oh, right, the next time they tell you something, it's also a lie? Yep. So they lied to you about his mental state in 2020. They massively lied about it in 2024. They lied about it while he was in office. Yep. Time and time again.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the cabinet meetings, and we'll do a little comparative analysis between Biden's cabinet meetings, or the frequency of them, versus Obama and Trump. So he did not hold very many cabinet meetings, which is insane, especially at such a chaotic time. Remember, he came in as the pandemic was still happening. Now, interactions between Biden and many of his cabinet members were relatively infrequent and often tightly scripted. At least one cabinet member stopped requesting calls with the president because it was clear that such requests wouldn't be welcome, a former senior cabinet aide said. So Biden had a total of 9 cabinet meetings in his term, 9. Now, we don't know how many cabinet meetings presidents typically have, so let's take a look at Obama and Trump. Well, Obama had 19. Trump had 25.
Yeah, and I remember people criticizing Trump for not having enough press conferences, not having enough meetings. He did 25, Biden only did 9. I'm gonna say something here that's also super damning of our national media. No one broke this story for 4 years. So apparently Biden's entire staff knew that he was in mental decline for 4 years, and not one reporter or news organization in mainstream media could break this story.
I know.
And I'll tell you why, because they're not trying to break that story.
It's uncomfortable, it's inconvenient. You don't want to draw the ire of an entire political party, and we know what that's like.
Oh, nobody knows better than us.
It's the most uncomfortable, terrible, alienating thing because you're just trying to do your job as accurately and fairly as possible. But in today's political climate and news media climate, you're expected to be a mouthpiece for one side or the other. Anyway, a little more detail in regard to the cabinet members. So one top Biden cabinet member met one-on-one with the president at most twice in the first year and rarely in small groups, another former senior cabinet aide said. So how do you run the country? How do you govern the country when you're not meeting with and coordinating with your cabinet members?
Yeah, I mean, imagine only meeting twice. I don't know which cabinet member it was, but you could fill in the blank on any of them, right? So what are you gonna do with Health and Human Services? I don't know, I only met the president twice, so I hope I got the good notes when I got to talk to him briefly, because I'm gonna have to make massively important decisions about health, especially in the beginning during COVID. Again, I don't know that it was that particular secretary, but filled on labor, on transportation, on, I hope it wasn't defense or state, right? This is crazy. And remember, when they're meeting with him, these are very tightly scripted, very short meetings. That means Biden is not in charge. Right. That means someone else wrote the script. And what I'd love to know, and as a follow-up to this story, is who was writing Biden's scripts and then making him memorize them poorly when he had these brief meetings.
Look, I know that there's a lot of focus on Jill Biden was really the president. And look, she definitely had control over Biden in some ways. However, I really do suspect that Anthony Blinken was the one who had a lot more sway over the administration than anyone else.
Yeah, so look, remember, sometimes it breaks out into different areas. So for example, Dick Cheney was in charge of the government, I think, for the first 6 years of the Bush administration, but mainly on foreign policy, right? On domestic policy, it was a combination of people like Hank Paulson from Goldman Sachs ran the country economically for the first couple of years, et cetera. So the governments are huge and a little bit complicated. In terms of Biden's administration, on domestic policy, it's a little less clear. But on foreign policy, I think Anna's right that Blinken was the Dick Cheney of Joe Biden.
Yep.
That he seemed firmly in charge. And by the way, so where do all of these intensely pro-Israel decisions come from? Sure, they come from the donors in the beginning, but Blinken is massively pro-Israel. And by the way, also his company,
yes,
funded by Israel,
yes,
his lobbying company,
yes,
that he was at before, that he's gonna go back to.
It was, okay, so he had founded a think tank. And with think tanks, you can hide, you can get dark money basically.
And hide your lobbying and your consulting.
Exactly,
right.
And so a lot of that was happening, and it was interesting to see a lot of the lobbying they did seemed to be on behalf of the Israeli government. So that's an issue, that's a huge conflict of interest. And by the way, I wrote about that before, like as soon as Biden named him, nominated him for the role he's serving in Biden's cabinet, I was like, I looked into Blinken and I'm like, there's a huge conflict of interest here with the think tank.
And look, I keep coming back to it for a reason, for a really important reason. Mainstream media is embarrassing. So were there any exposés about how Blinken is actually running foreign policy? Forget running foreign policy. Were there any exposés about how Blinken is getting, his company was getting money from Israel?
I remember.
And then there was one great article, right? I don't remember.
Lee Fong
wrote it. You see, independent media, of course.
For The Intercept at the time.
And after The Intercept reports on it, did it not occur to the editors of the Washington Post and New York Times, well, that sounds like a really interesting story.
Right.
Maybe we should follow up on this. No. Now, when you got conflict of interest with Elon, I think we should follow up on that as well, and mainstream media agrees. But whenever you have conflict of interest with Democrats or uniparty, like establishment Republicans, oh, no. Hear no evil, see no evil.
So final thing that I have to mention about this, because this is the juiciest. So campaigning for the 2024 election begins, and Jill Biden is campaigning way more than Joe Biden is, right? And so specifically in Iowa, Jill Biden is like campaign stop after campaign stop, doing her thing. And Biden, not so much. And so her press secretary at the time, Michael LaRosa, touted her efforts while speaking to a local reporter in Iowa. But LaRosa's superior in the Biden camp chided him for saying positive things about Joe Biden's wife to a local reporter. Get a load of this. Anthony Bernal, then a deputy campaign manager and chief of staff to Jill Biden, pressed LaRosa to contact the reporter again and played down any comparison in campaign appearances between Joe Biden, then 77, and his wife, who is 8 years his junior. Her energetic schedule only highlighted her husband's more plodding pace. LaRosa recalls being told, the message from Biden's team was clear. The more you talk her up, the more you make him look bad, LaRosa said.
So,
dude.
I mean, look, there's a couple of problems there. One is they're so worried that Biden's falling apart at the seams that they're like, don't mention his wife, who's also super old but looks super energetic compared to him because he's falling apart at the seams.
And she is super energetic compared to him.
Yes, but secondly, they might have been saying that, Anna, because they're like, don't draw attention to the fact that Jill's running the place, right?
Maybe, I don't know.
So, and remember, the reason we're not just saying that out of nowhere, and I didn't realize it until there was this piece in a British paper that explained how Jill Biden was sitting in on cabinet interviews when somebody was being interviewed for a cabinet level position, and that she would sometimes interview staffers by herself without Joe Biden. So I was like, I've never seen a first lady do anything like that. And so apparently she had a ton of control inside the White House. But if you ever mentioned it, not only would the Democrats take your head off, mainstream media would take your head off. How dare you say that? That is so disrespectful, etc. So the idea that these guys are challenging the powerful is hilarious. Mainstream media is doing no such thing. So now that his term is over, Wall Street Journal breaks this story, and it's the same thing we told you guys all along. Biden is not really in control. He never should have run. And by the way, the reason that he was running, despite the fact that his entire staff knew he was in mental decline, was because Jill Biden wanted to run. So that seems very clear at this point. So she deserves a tremendous amount of blame. And there's one thing that I've said this before and people misinterpret it. One thing I love about what happened in this election is not that Donald Trump won. That's a bull in a china shop, and I don't want some of that stuff being broken in our government, right? But the establishment and their oppressive prison that they kept everyone in. You're not allowed to say that. You're not allowed to say the truth. We're gonna try to destroy you, etc. Then now nobody cares. Okay, go ahead. Tell us that, you're not allowed to say anything about Jill Biden. Nobody cares about your stupid rules anymore. You weren't the press. All you were just giant marketing effort for the establishment. And now, especially with Biden apparently not having run the country for 4 years and not one person in mainstream media reporting that, we know for sure now they were not in the news business, they were in the marketing business.
Hey, thanks for watching that video. We really appreciate it, guys. And we appreciate it if you become members because that allows us to be independent, honest, progressive, all the things that you don't get from corporate media. And all of that is because of you guys. Hit the join button below and become one of us. Become a young Turk.